Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Saints Insider. This is Zach Ewing with Rod Walker, Jeff Duncan, and Matthew Paris. Kind of coming to you scattered throughout South Louisiana today. Did not go into the studio today because of the weather. Just trying to stay on the safe side. So if you hear any thunder in the background or anything, that's probably the guys down in New Orleans. It's raining up here in Livingston Parish, but not. Most of the worst of it, I think, is past us up here. So, but did not want to drive through that. So we are coming to you remote today. Appreciate you joining us as always as we continue our NFL draft coverage. This season's NFL draft coverage is brought to you by Tulane Doctors. Now at East Jefferson General Hospital, Tulane Doctors are bringing academic medicine to more patients in new communities. Look for the shield to know the future of medicine is here. Find your physician at tulanedoctors.com or call 504-988-5000. So our thanks to them. Our thanks to you for tuning in. Subscribe to the Saints Insider on YouTube. The channel is actually Saints on NOLA.com. So if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and do that. And ready to announce our giveaway. We don't know the exact swag package we'll have, but we will have some Saints Insider gifts for you, whether it's polo shirts like I'm wearing, mugs, hats, things like that. I think we're going to get a Jeff Duncan signed book in the mix, Jeff.
Yeah, I think so. I think we might be able to get a couple of those for my Bags of Riches book after. Maybe get a little nostalgic for the great glory days of the Saints Super Bowl run, and then hopefully a couple of copies of the Steve Gleason memoir that's going to be coming out later this month. Yeah,
so some good stuff in there. We're going to pick out 2 or 3 winners. What you have to do to be eligible is, number one, be subscribed to the YouTube channel. That's saintsonnola.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you have to leave a comment on 2 videos between now and draft day. So we'll check through, we'll tally up those comments. You got to leave a comment on 2 different videos between today, April 10th, and draft day, April the 25th. So if you do that, you're eligible. We'll draw a couple of names and have some winners. So looking forward to that. Other than that, let's hit some draft talk. A lot of what we've talked about, guys, Rod, has been offensive players. I know we did a mock draft last week. We all said offensive tackle. A lot of us said Olu Fashanu is the pick for the Saints at number 14. Saints kind of have a history of not doing what you expect. So today we're going to talk a little bit different. What if they don't pick offense?
Well, first of all, I'd be shocked. Let's start there. But, yeah, I mean, they've surprised us a couple of times over the years, but, I would be surprised if they did that this time. I just think that the need at tackle is just too great to ignore, but we'll see.
So we'll start there. I mean, this is hypothetical. We don't expect this to happen. And actually, at the end, we're going to talk about whether it's even a good idea or under any circumstance. But, Matt, you've been researching some of the defensive players. And listen, if they don't take them in round 1, they may go to defense in round 2. But I do think probably a defensive lineman at somewhere in the draft is likely. It just may not be in round 1.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you could talk yourself into a defensive tackle for the second round pick. Someone like Braden Fisk from Florida State, if he's there at 45, maybe they want to beef up that. It seems like, it's interesting because they poured so many resources into that position last year. They drafted Brian Brzee, and then they signed Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard. But that run defense still isn't where they probably want it to be. And how do you fix that? You get those big guys up the middle. Maybe you try and draft a run-stuffing defensive tackle, and there are some, prospects in this draft who can do that. But for me, I would still lean offense in round 1 especially, but, that they do have 4 fifth-round picks later in the draft for sure. And I also think the interesting one I want to see what they do is, do they draft a cornerback and potentially Marshawn Lattimore's replacement, depending on what happens there? Could they tip their hand with what they want to do with Lattimore based on how this draft goes?
Jeff, most of the mock drafts you look at have only one defensive player going in the top 10. That's Dallas Turner, the edge rusher from Alabama. I guess that's the temptation, is that you could get a top 2 to 3 defensive talent in this draft at number 14. Do you see any way the Saints give into that temptation?
I don't know. I mean, I think what Rod said makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is one of those few drafts where the Saints' needs marry up with how the rest of the board's going to fall. So I think it makes a lot of sense to take a tackle. They need that. There's going to be some really good ones available. So it would be shocking if they did not take an offensive lineman, especially a tackle, I think, at 14. But I think the possibility is that this team makes a deal. I'm probably going to write this column soon of, I know we've talked about this before, but of all years, I think this is a year where they could trade down. I mean, they only have 2 picks in the first 4 rounds. So this team is not in a position like they were years ago where they were trading up. I mean, we were like a Super Bowl contending team. They were 13-3, and they could afford to go get an elite prospect because their roster was stacked. I mean, they need just starting caliber young players because of their salary cap. So I think we could possibly see them trade down, not a long way, but maybe, a handful of spots, stay in the top 20, still get a very good tackle, and maybe pick up a second or third round pick that they desperately need. So I think they could address, the defensive side of the ball in those picks. That's what I would do if I were them. Otherwise, I think if they stay where they're at, they have to take a tackle.
Zach, you going back to when we did our mock draft, one of the things I kind of mentioned was Dennis Allen. I mean, I think, we've all kind of talked about how this is it for him, and this is the season that he needs to do something. So I think if there's like a really good defensive tackle out there, or defensive end, or whatever you want to get, yeah, it may work well for the long term of this franchise. But for this season, I think Dennis Allen needs a tackle, and I think his job is on the line this season. So I think if this is the year to win it, I mean, for them to be a playoff team, I think they have to address that need. So that's why I'm still just kind of leaning towards them having to stay there. But I mean, like Jeff said, I mean, they move up and do some other stuff that's a little different. But
and look, you make a great point, Rod. I mean, like Derek Carr needs a tackle too, right? I mean, right. Derek Carr, one of the reputations he has around the league is, he doesn't like to get hit, and no quarterback really does. But he, in particular, at this stage of his career, I think, is not a guy who likes to step into the teeth of a pass rush. So they got to do a better job of protecting for him if they want to get the return on the investment that they made a year ago. They didn't get that from the offensive line. So I think it just makes a lot of sense. I may be different than everybody else here on the pod, but I'll be stunned if they take a defensive end. I just don't see a need for that at all. I don't see any of these prospects that really fit the way the Saints like to draft their defensive ends. I mean, Dallas Turner's a smaller guy. He doesn't really fit their prototypes. I guess you could make a case he could be just a specialist, a rush specialist, the way Zach Bond was a year ago. But you got a lot of guys you've invested in already, high draft picks for that aspect of your team. I think more than positions defensively, they need certain aspects. Like I think they could use, a kind of a joker defensive back that can defend tight ends. They don't, the way C.J. Gardner-Johnson played in the secondary, they don't really have that hybrid safety corner type. And I think they could also use, maybe a run stuff, like Matt said, a run stuffing defensive tackle. Brian Brzee, the pass rushing guy. They could use one of those big beef eaters inside to go with him. I don't think long-term Shepard or Saunders is the answer there. So I think those two needs weigh out more than anything else on defense.
Yeah, I think for run stuffing defensive tackles, especially like a guy like Chris Jenkins in the second round could make some sense. But yeah, as for the pass rushers, they went out and signed Chase Young. That was their big move. I think adding him into the fold gives them confidence that their position, that they're at least set there, even though Young has some injury risks. They feel confident about it. So we'll see. Personally, I think they could still use someone maybe later in the draft, but they just have a lot of bodies there, and I don't think they're ready to give up on some of these guys like an Isaiah Foskey either.
Yeah, actually, we have a graphic later on, but 5 of the Saints' past 7 picks in the top 2 rounds have been defensive players. The only exceptions were the 2 that they took in the first round 2 years ago in Chris Olave and Trevor Penning. So they've got a lot of high picks on the defense. Maybe the conversation changes a little bit. I can't imagine this happening, but Dallas Turner is pretty clearly the top edge rusher in the draft. If he's somehow available when the Saints pick, he's 6'3", 250. He's this explosive pass rusher. He's a great athlete like the Saints like. But I would think even if he somehow manages to drop to 14, that would be what you're talking about, Jeff, where the Saints would hold an auction for that pick and say, hey, who wants the best defensive player in the draft? And let's go stock up on second and third rounders.
Right. I mean, I'll give you a good example. Carl Granderson, now he was undrafted, but a very similar sized guy when he came out. I think he was around 260 out of Wyoming. And the first 2 or 3 years he was with the Saints were spent bulking up to where he got to 280. That's the way they like their defensive ends here. If they were happy with that, they wouldn't have asked him to bulk up to 280. You know, that's a lot of work that he had to put in to become a starting caliber defensive end. I'd be surprised if they went that right. I know Jeff Ireland has said their prototypes change. The way their prototypes work, we should explain that to people. All it is, there's no secret sauce to this. They just take the starting players at every team in the league, and they just average out what their size prototype is. Now, what's happening is players around the league are getting smaller. So defensive ends, as the league goes to faster players, the defensive end prototype goes down for the Saints. It's because the rest of the league is getting smaller. But in general, they like their defensive ends to be much bigger. I guess you could make a case he could be a pass rush specialist, a guy that comes in on passing situations. They certainly could use that. But I think, like Matt said, they've got too much invested in these other guys, I think, to give up on them. And somebody would end up being probably cut. High draft pick they'd be given up on. And I could see that playing out where they go somewhere else and become a star. You know, it happens all the time.
I think the guy for me that is maybe the most intriguing, if you were to play devil's advocate and say, all right, let's just draft a pass rusher, someone who can play every down, a guy like Liatu Latu from UCLA, he's the most, I think, polished guy, at least according to, draft analysts and stuff. But seems like he has a very polished game. He's maybe that guy who could be that instant spark for them and just kind of be that consistent force. But I say that, and he has he had a neck injury in college too. And so you're adding Chase Young in the mix. He has a neck injury. You're going to add Latu, who had a neck injury. It just seems like kind of a little bit too much of a risk to take at 14 when you just have such another pressing need there at tackle.
And I think you hit on something a second ago with cornerback. Like, if they draft a cornerback at 14, and I think that would be the position I would go if I were them and you were going to go defense, then I think that sends a message to potentially a future trade of Marshawn Lattimore. Maybe not this year, but certainly in the offseason after the next season. I think if you do that, you're sending up a red flare.
And I was going Matt sort of hit on a lot too, but that he missed 2 seasons with an injury, and I just don't think the Saints can afford to use a first-round draft pick on a guy like that. We all know how Marcus Davenport's career is, so I just don't think you can make that kind of move with that pick.
Yeah, why would Dennis Allen, like you said, Dennis Allen's got to win.
Right.
He's got to win. He can't afford to roll the dice here. He's got to get somebody that is safe, I think, while trying to have an impact.
Well, I think it's funny for him. He is kind of the safe pick if you just look at his on-field production.
True.
Right.
The other stuff is not safe.
Yeah, he didn't have trouble at UCLA, right? I mean, he got cleared by UCLA and has been okay, or am I wrong?
Yeah, no, he's been fine.
Yeah, but I mean, this is a defense that's kind of rife with risk already between the injury-prone players and an aging roster. Guys who haven't really been hurt much, but are getting older, and you just tend to not be able to be available and as effective as you get past that age 35 that some of these key guys are getting to. So, I don't know that it makes a ton of sense. I was going to mention Liatu Latu is 6'5". He's only, I think, listed at 260, so he's only a little bigger than Dallas Turner, but he has that 6'5" frame. Maybe could more easily put on the weight that the Saints like to see. Jared Verse is another guy. I think he's 6'4" at Florida State. I mean, these are your first round names. And then you move on to some of the other positions. Jeff, you mentioned a corner. A lot of mock drafts have Sean Payton's Broncos taking the top corner in the draft, Terrion Arnold, right before the Saints. I actually happen to think that would be a good thing for New Orleans, because it means that that's one fewer offensive tackle off the board that they could go get then. But if they do take defense, Terrion Arnold is one out there. And then the run stuffing D tackle that you talked about, Matt, would be the top guy would be Byron Murphy at Texas.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say that the guy I'm kind of intrigued by, and Matt laughed about this a couple of pods ago when we brought up Cooper DeJean, right, from Iowa.
Sure,
I mean, he's kind of one of these jack of all trades guys. And I just start looking at the Saints depth chart, and I know they're kind of set at safety this year with Ty Matthew and Jordan Howden, but beyond next season, I mean, and we don't know yet how good Howden's going to be. I mean, I think safety and that kind of, like I said, that joker position, star position, the guy that can defend tight ends. They had so much trouble with tight ends a year ago. I think there's a need for that. If you think also you might eventually be moving on from Lattimore and Alante Taylor is going to find a home outside, then it becomes an even more pressing need. So I think if you're on defense, you're looking for different aspects that will help this defense more than just a position. And DeJean he can play a number of spots in the secondary.
Yeah, for him, I kind of like to see him at outside corner just because, that's where he played, I think, mostly in college. He has production there in terms of interceptions. He's a freak athlete. I mean, he just recently tested at his pro day. He didn't test at the combine because he was coming off an injury, but he posted let me pull up the number here, a 4.43, 38-inch vertical jump, just really impressive kind of athlete numbers that I think would fit the Saints well. And Jeff, like, yeah, you said he could cover tight ends. I mean, maybe for year one, if Lattimore's still there, you put DeJean in the slot and go with that, and then, kick him outside if Lattimore is gone after next year. But if we're talking Lattimore comps, I mean, the guy that has been compared to Lattimore throughout this draft process is Toledo's Quinyon Mitchell. They're almost the same height. Mitchell's an eighth of an inch taller. They both have 31-inch arms. They weigh 2 pounds apart, and they posted nearly identical 40 times. And he's a guy that has been also linked to the Broncos if, Sean Payton wants to find his version of Marshawn Lattimore. But they have Patrick Surtain, too. So, I mean, are the Broncos really going to use the 12th pick on a second quarterback? It's kind of where I have questions about that. But,
Yeah. And I mean, we talk about Cooper DeJean and it, to your point, Rod, earlier, it just seems like these picks would be a luxury if you have a roster that can afford to make a pick like that. This roster has a glaring need, and that's kind of where I want to wrap this up. It's like, is there a world in which taking a defensive player in round one makes any sense for the Saints? Maybe they have a plan to go re-sign Andres Pete or have another plan at tackle, or they feel better about Trevor Penning than the rest of us do. I mean, is there a world where this makes any sense at all?
Not for me, and we're talking about defensive players, but I wouldn't care if Jaden Daniels slipped down to 14 and everybody in Louisiana wants him. I just think you have to get a tackle here, regardless of who's available. This is just that 1 year where you can't get the best player available. You got to get that need just because of, I mean, we saw the Saints offense struggle last season, especially beginning when they couldn't protect Carr and 17 sacks through the first 6 games. And you just can't have another season like that. I mean, you brought in your new coordinator, and you need to give him all the pieces he needs to be successful. And if you don't bring in a tackle, Clint Kubiak won't be successful here. I
think the only way you would ever justify taking a defensive player was if there was some, elite Aaron Donald type guy that somehow fell to 14, and then he was so good you couldn't pass him up. And I don't think there's anybody like that, at least in the analysis I've read in this draft on the defensive side of the ball. I think it's more offensive stack draft, so it would make zero sense, to go on the defensive side.
Yeah, you guys both hit on it. I think the chances are that the best player available for the Saints by the time they're on the clock will be a tackle. That's just kind of how this draft shakes out, and it's very fortunate for them.
Yeah, I think the question would be – I was just going to say, I think the question would be, say they get to 14 and I don't know, Fashanu is gone, and you've got those 3 other tackles that are kind of lumped together as well. And what's the Graham Barton guy? I think a lot of people like him. They think he can be a versatile offensive lineman. If you say you've got 4 first-round graded offensive linemen, and you're sitting there at 14, and Fashanu and Alt are off the board, that's the case I would make to trade down, because you're more than likely going to get one of those other tackles in the next. I don't think maybe there's a run on tackles, but if you've traded 5 spots, you could pick up your need and then pick up one of these top picks. I mean, I did some Zach Ewing like research coming in today. I mean, the Saints in the last 2 decades have had, they've got 2 picks in the top 150, I think it is right now, or 149 if you want to get technical. And the chances of them getting players below 150 in the draft are going to be, first of all, getting an impact player, almost impossible. The 43 players they picked, I think they ended up with like 6 starting players, like, Marcus Colston obviously was a very good pick, Zach Strief. But for the most part, you're dealing with the Davis Tolles, the Colby Bockwalts, the Daniel Lascos of the world. You're really rolling the dice. So I think they've got to get up into that top 100 with more than just 2 picks. This team needs more help than that.
Yeah, you did mention one thing, Jeff, that maybe the only possibility where something like this makes sense, and even then trading down probably makes more sense. But if there does happen to be a run on tackles, and it's not just Joe Alt and Olu Fashanu or J.C. Latham or someone who's gone by the time you pick at 14, what if those 3 guys plus Fatanu and Fuaga are all gone? For some reason, this thing just goes haywire, and the top 5 tackles are all off the board. Then the Saints have to kind of go back to the drawing board. I would argue your scenario of trading down still makes more sense in that scenario, because then you need just get volume over the quality of one guy, you think. But that's a scenario where if everything gets thrown for a loop, you have to reevaluate, and maybe you do have some other positions up higher.
I think an interesting team to watch is ahead of Saints, the Falcons. What are they going to do? To me, I know a lot of people projecting Dallas Turner or edge rusher there. I wouldn't be surprised if they threw everybody a curveball and just went for the best player available. And it could end up being a tackle who very few people have them projected to take a tackle. So you're right. If you just take the best players on the board, those quarterbacks are probably going to go, those big three receivers and these tackles. Teams may say, you know what, I'd rather take a sure thing, one of these tackles that's graded higher than Dallas Turner, who might or might not pan out. So we could see that possibility.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us. We've got a few more draft shows to come. We'll have a whole show about the possibility of the Saints trading. We'll look at the chances of them trading up or trading back. We may have another show just on offensive tackles. Who's the best fit? Is it Olu Fashanu? And why is it Olu Fashanu? And then maybe we'll talk about some other stuff as well, like what happens if there is a run on tackles in the top 12 picks, top 13 picks. So appreciate you dealing with a Zoom stream today instead of the studio. Hope everyone's staying safe out there in the weather. Our thoughts are with those of y'all in Slidell who got hit by that tornado and anywhere else that was affected by the weather this morning. Subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel. Leave a comment on 2 different videos between now and our live draft night video, and we will be picking giveaways for that. So until then, we'll see you guys on Friday with another NFL draft video podcast brought to you by Tulane Doctors. For Rod Walker, Jeff Duncan, Matthew Paris, I'm Zach Ewing. Thank you, everybody, for watching.